Hey guys, what's up? It's Scott Clark with Scooter Media, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about these little guys here, ND filters, what you use them for, when to use them, and how to use them, and the importance of an ND filter. A lot of people don't really understand what these things do, so today we're going to get into that, and we're going to show you how to use these guys, and I literally use this thing every day. Let's get into it. So basically what an ND filter is like sunglasses for your camera or for your lens, which is going to block the amount of light coming in and hitting the lens. So basically this one here is called a variable ND. You can turn it and it's going to change the amount of light coming in and hitting the lens. So that's a variable ND. They do also make non-variable NDs, so you cannot change the amount of ND. This is just, you're stuck with the amount given, and then there's different ND filters. So for this one, if you wanted to change the amount, you would actually physically have to change the filter instead of dialing it in with the variable. They do also make these little things for drones as well. So that little thing there, I don't know if you can see that, is literally gonna fit on the DJI Mavic 2 Mini. But for the most part, I usually use the variable NDs just because they're more convenient and not have to worry about switching them off the camera. So basically what I use this for is I set my camera up and I want to set the shutter speed, the frame rate, white balance, the ISO, everything I want to set, and I just want to leave it the same way every time I shoot. So basically I shoot everything at 24 frames per second, unless of course we're doing slow motion, but we're not doing that today. So I'm shooting at 24 frames per second. My shutter speed is double that, so we're at 1/50 just because the camera doesn't do over 1/48. My aperture is as wide open as it can get, and on this lens it's 1.8, f1.8, and the base ISO when I shoot in Canon Log 3, which is what I always shoot in, is ISO 800. So basically what I want to do is I want to set the camera with ISO 800, f1.8, shutter at 1/50, and my frame rate at 24 frames per second. So what I want to show you right now is I have this camera set up, which is the Canon R7. It is using a variable ND. Beside it right here, I also have the Canon R6. It's basically running the same settings. It's ISO 800, 1/50 shutter speed, f1.8. We're shooting at 24 frames per second. The only difference between the two cameras, this one I'm using an ND filter, this one has no ND. So it's basically set up with all the same settings as this guy, and this is what the ND filter is doing for me. Now, there are ways to adjust the camera without using an ND filter, but it is going to affect the image. So if I go in here and I change my aperture, let's see, we had it at f1.8, so if I put it up to, let's say, f16. Okay, so we've basically adjusted the aperture. This one's now at f16 to make up for the bright sunlight coming in. This one's still at f1.8. If you take a look at the background behind me, the one that's at f1.8 is all blurry and looks very much more cinematic, whereas this one, the background isn't blurry. It's basically, everything's in focus. It just doesn't look quite as nice as in cinematic as this one, which is essentially what the ND filter is going to give you. It's going to allow you to keep those settings, allow you to open up that aperture and keep that shallow depth of field, which in turn makes your footage look that much more cinematic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back to f1.8. There we are there. The other thing you could do, and again, this is not something I normally do, if you want to up your shutter speed, you can do that. So right now we always want to keep our shutter speed at double whatever the frame rate, and that's going to give you the best motion blur, or the most realistic motion blur. That's the 180-degree shutter rule. So every time I shoot, normally I'm shooting at 24 frames per second. If the camera does 1/48, we do 1/48 for the shutter speed. In my case, these cameras do 1/50, so that's what they're set at. If you're in a situation where you don't have an ND filter and you don't want to, lose your shallow depth of field and you want to figure out what to do, you can adjust the shutter speed. I wouldn't recommend it. But again, we can bump that up. And right now I am sitting at 1/3200. And again, we're not getting the nice image. It's gonna make my hand move all stuttery, whereas this one over here, it's gonna have that nice motion blur. When I shake my hand over here, it looks all stuttery. It just doesn't look proper. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put our shutter speed back to 1/50. I apologize, it's getting a little windy out here, so I apologize if there's wind noise. And I'm gonna attach this variable ND, and we're just gonna screw it on the front of the lens. Okay, so right now we've got our lens on there. And then we just dial it in until we're happy with the exposure. Oops, and I just noticed our thing is at, there we go. So essentially, we're sitting at the same settings on both cameras right now, and we've got ND filters on both, and we look like we've got our background blurry. This is how I would shoot, and this is exactly what the importance of the ND filter is, to give that image the blurry background, make it look that much more cinematic, and it just makes your footage look excellent. I use these things every day. Very rarely do I not have these on the camera. Even inside, I can adjust the lighting, but it's just gonna give you that blurry background that you want, especially with bright lenses. So this guy here, this lens, we can even go up to f1.4 and make our background even a little bit blurrier. And again, we can adjust how much ND we want to use here. And there we go, guys. The variable NDs are not cheap. So generally what I do, I'm going to take this one off of here and I'll show you what I've done here. So basically, I've bought the biggest ND filter I could find, which in my case was 82 millimeters. And then I bought step-up rings. And what these allow you to do is you can attach the filter to the step-up rings like that. You just screw it in there. And that's gonna allow you to attach it to everything from, what is it there, 26 millimeter all the way up to a 77 millimeter. And that's gonna allow you to use that variable ND on basically any lens that you have. All right, guys, I know everybody doesn't shoot in log like I do, so I'm gonna show you an example, not using log, just using the standard picture profile. So to do that, I'm gonna turn my log off in camera here. So now that we've taken it out of log, we can now bring our ISO back to 100. So the base ISO when we were in log 3 is 800. Because we're not in log now, we can bring that down to 100, which will affect our exposure. But as you can see, I can still use my ND filter. And just to show you guys, I'm using the Canon R7. I've got the Sigma 18 to 35, and I'm using an adapter in here. So it's the EF to R adapter. And within that adapter, there's a variable ND. So all I have to do is use this little dial here and I can change the exposure. Right now we're completely overexposed. We can go all the other way and we're completely underexposed. So we just want to find a happy medium. And I also just wanted to show you guys that you can use this for B-roll as well. It's not just for shooting faces and people. If you look at our B-roll shot now, we can kind of see that we're kind of zoomed in on the flower in the middle, and all of the other flowers behind it and whatnot are out of focus. So the one that we're focused in on is kind of in focus, and everything behind that is out of focus, making it look very cinematic. If we didn't have our ND filter, this is what it would look like, and we would literally have to take our aperture and turn that back all the way up to, let's say, f13 or f14 or so. And if you look at our image now, all of the flowers in behind are in focus. There's nothing that's out of focus, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it just doesn't look quite as cinematic because everything's in focus, whereas before, the flower that we were zoomed in on and focusing on was in focus and everything else behind it was out of focus, just giving us that very cinematic look, which is what these ND filters are gonna achieve for you. All right, guys, just to recap, these ND filters are basically like sunglasses for your lens. And the variable ones are gonna allow you to change the amount of ND. The ones that are set, you cannot turn. They're just gonna give you a set amount. And then if you do wanna change that amount, you do have to take those off and change them out. I do prefer the variable ND filters. One thing to note, I mentioned earlier, they're not cheap, but I would recommend spending the money on good ND filters. If you do cheap out and buy the cheaper ones, you're gonna see that there can be a little bit of a shift in color, and I just recommend getting the good ones. You get better results and your footage is gonna come out looking better. And in the long run, if you invest now, you don't have to keep buying these things later. They do come, like I mentioned earlier, in all kinds of different sizes. They come for your drone. They come for every single kind of lens. But like I mentioned earlier, what I do is I buy the step-up rings. I bought an 82 millimeter filter, which is what I'm using on the front of this one. And then if I just want to use it on any other lens, I just take off whatever size step-up ring I need, attach that, put the filter on the front, and then I can use these basically with any lenses that I have. And these step-up rings are super cheap rather than buying a bunch of ND filters. And for any Canon shooters, the one that I use on my camera every single day is the EF to R adapter with the built-in ND. And again, that sits behind the lens and you can adjust the amount of ND. And what I like about this is that this works with every EF and EFS lens. So basically, I put this in between the camera and the lens, and I basically got built-in ND filters for all of my lenses. So hopefully you guys found value in this. If you did find value in the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, as it really does make a difference. And I'd love to have you join me on this YouTube journey. And if you're interested in checking out a video I did about this little adapter with the ND filter built in, I will put a little link right here and you can check that out at your leisure, but it's a great little investment and I use it every day. Thanks for watching today's video. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.